This is the Imprint. It comes from a company called Cyboard, and when you look at it, a few things might stand out. It's got some cool RGB lighting, it's got a fancy trackball over here, there's a thumb cluster with 6 buttons, there's a palm pad that, by the way, comes off, and all of those things are features of the keyboard, but to me, the thing that makes this keyboard appealing is actually hidden under the hood a little bit. Now, to explain that, it helps to understand that I've had RSI issues in the past, and I've been exploring ergonomic keyboards ever since. And there's a type of keyboard that has a lot of comfort built in, and that will be these keyboards that have this curved keywell, so to say. So these are keyboards where literally what can happen is you can have a hand that falls into it. Typically, these are also keyboards that have column stagger, so you can really just move your fingers forward and backwards. But it's really the fact that your fingers can fall into here that adds a lot of the comfort. And there's a couple of boards that do that, but the downside of all the boards that I've tried so far that have this curved feature is that they don't allow you to pull out the switches. Under each keycap, there is a mechanical switch, and by pressing it and releasing it, you're able to send a signal to the computer that indeed something is being pressed. But these switches come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You've got heavier ones, lighter ones that actuate quicker. And what might happen is a switch could break, so then you would want to replace it. Or maybe at some point you figure, hey, there's just a slightly different switch I'm interested in trying out. On a normal, flat keyboard, that is no problem whatsoever. Those usually are hot-swappable. But these curved keyboards so far aren't. Now, the reason for this is a bit technical, but my impression is that to keep the PCB that's curved in place, and to ensure that the switch that's in here is properly connected to it, you have to solder them completely. However, this board is different. Because what I can do is I can just remove a couple of keycaps. I can bring in my switch puller, and lo and behold, it comes out super duper easy. I can switch it around with another switch as much as I like. I can remove, a few of these switches in a row. And when I do, you're going to see a really nice touch of this keyboard. Not only is this a curved keyboard where you're able to switch the switches, but you can also see that there are these like little grooves on top. And those are grooves that fit the key puller. So if you want to remove switches, you just put your key puller in one of these grooves, and it's just so much easier to get the switch pulled out. So literally, by design, you're invited to switch these switches. Not only is it possible, you're actually invited to do that. Now again, this keyboard has plenty of other features that we should talk about, but to me, the main thing that makes this keyboard unique and different than all the other boards that I've tried is that this keyboard has a curved keywell, and you can switch the switches. To my knowledge, this is the only keyboard that even does that. So I'd love to move on and talk about more of the details here, but before I do want to add a little disclaimer, and that is that I did not pay for this keyboard with my own money. It was sent to me for review. I had a little back and forth to give feedback to the creator of this keyboard, and although they were very receptive to some of the things I had to say, it deserves to be stressed that they did not influence my review whatsoever here. I will say this is going to be a positive review because I think there's a lot of things to like, but there are also a couple of things that I don't, and I also think it's safe to say that this keyboard won't be for everyone out there. But having said that, let's talk about this other thing that makes this keyboard unique, and that is the fact that this keyboard literally is unique. When you buy this keyboard, you're supposed to make photos of your hands with a bank card such that they can measure the distance of all of your different fingers. And in doing so, they're able to determine where all the switches have to be placed. And this includes not just your main fingers, it also includes the thumb cluster, and even the placement of this palm rest is determined by the shape of your hand. Now, it's kind of hard for me to explain what it's like to type on a keyboard that's quote-unquote fit to your hand. But the easiest way for me to explain it is maybe to compare it to this other keyboard that I have called the Glove 80. A great keyboard, by the way, but this is a keyboard that doesn't necessarily fit my hand in a customized fashion. This is one design, and everyone can buy this one effectively. Just like with this keyboard, my hand can go in, and there's a nice little resting position. It's very natural. And for me, the most comfortable spot for my thumb would be right over here. My palm sits here nice and snug, and I can quite easily move my fingers up and down along the curve. But now suppose that I want to hit this number over here. Well, my middle finger can reach that relatively easily without moving my palm, but the other fingers that I've got, they can stretch as much as they like, but they simply won't reach. It's just the middle finger that can reach it. If I want to hit those number buttons, I just have to move my hand up a little. It's not the worst thing, but you do have to move your hand up a bit, hit the button you're interested in, and then move back down, back to the resting position. Now, let's contrast that to what my hand does over here. The resting position now for my thumb would be the upper key over here. I put my hands in the resting position, and if I now wanted to, all of my fingers, they can just touch all of these buttons. That just totally works without breaking a sweat. Also notice, by the way, that without moving my palm whatsoever, my fingers can also move all the way to the bottom over here, and these are also quite comfortable to type on. Now, the fact that I'm able to hit all these keys on top over here, that's definitely super nice. But if I were to put my finger on the thing that really makes it unique, I guess it would have to be what is happening to my pinky. There's something about the pinky stagger over here where it's really aggressive in the height. I think that's the reason why it's so easy for this finger to still hit all the buttons on the side over here. Now, the fact that this really fits my fingers is a very nice experience, but I do want to warn you, it is an experience that takes a while to get used to. Simply because that experience on your pinky is so unlike what other boards feel like. You're used to moving your palm a little bit, and the fact that you don't have to do that at all here also means that, at least for me, you can trigger a couple of keys by accident. Now, on that one topic, by the way, I have also noticed that you have to be a little bit conscious about the switches you actually put into this keyboard. In general, one of my favorite switches to start with are keywell speed switches. These are switches that actuate very quickly, and these are also switches that tend to be quite light. When I put those switches in this thing, I was accidentally triggering everything left, right, and center. It wasn't a great experience. Then I switched to proper tactile switches that are a little bit harder to actuate, and since then I would argue the experience has been much nicer. And odds are that you might experience something similar too. Because it's so easy to maybe trigger, I can recommend having tactile switches in here. Some of this is personal, I get that, but just be aware that there's a learning curve. It definitely took me a couple of weeks to really get used to this. Now, the elephant in the room that we got to talk about that's also attached to this keyboard is this trackball over here. And there's a few things to note. Some other keyboards put the trackball not on the side over here, but firmly under your thumb. Again, this is the care of this, and you can see that if I wanted to maybe do something with the keyball, then if I wanted to keep my hand in a resting position and not move it, then I would have to really move my thumb inward. Now, it's recommended that you float your hand with this board, I think, and if you do that, then you can maybe move your finger and stuff like that. But I have found just this thumb on the inside, that does cause me a little bit of strain eventually. Not only that, the way that this board is designed, by the way, notice that if I were to tip it, the ball would fall out. There's no safety mechanism on top over here. However, that's different here. I can grab the ball out just fine. This is great because you do want to be able to clean the insides. But then if I wanted to put the ball back in, it does click. And that also means that if I were to, hold it upside down, the ball would not fall out. Nice touch. Another nice touch as far as that ball is concerned is in the configuration software. This board comes with Vile, and that's configuration software. Here's what it looks like. I have a separate video on how to configure anything with Vile, by the way, so check that if you're interested. But the one thing that's nice is that at the bottom over here, you've got these separate tabs, and there is this one tab that has all sorts of user settings. And these settings are specific to this board. One thing that you're able to configure is you're able to configure a key press to add sensitivity to the trackball, or maybe remove it. And just to give a quick demo of that, I'm just going to move this around a little, and then I'm going to hit this key a few times. And you'll notice that at some point, oh boy, does it get sensitive. I can reduce the sensitivity as well. It's a different key press that I've got over here. The fact that you can change the sensitivity live if you wanted to is a really nice touch. By allowing for this, you don't have to dive into QMK code or really compile anything yourself. You still seem to be able to do a whole bunch from Vile. Now, I got the setup with 2 trackballs, and if I were honest, you don't need 2. It's a bit of an excessive thing. You can configure one of the trackballs to be more for swiping and for scrolling, and the other one can actually be a proper mouse. And I will say, if you have this on your keyboard, you're not going to play video games with it, I think, but this has been enough, at least for me, to deal with those moments when you really got to click and drag something around. Vile is based on QMK, so what you could also do is configure mouse movement by doing things with key presses. That is also something you can totally do on these boards. But for a couple of times, you do want to have a trackball like this maybe. And what I found is it's also kind of nice that you're able to do 2 things. Like I can move my thumb up and that can control this, or I can also still use my fingers if need be. The way I've configured this, by the way, is this hand can move around and control the mouse, and there's these 2 buttons down below here with my other hand, and they can simulate the mouse clicks. Works for me. Now, because this board was sponsored, I think it's safe to say that I got the board that has a couple of bells and whistles that are nice additions. One of them is I got the premium 3D print, which feels premium, no complaints about that. If you looked at this from a couple of feet away, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that this was 3D printed, so that definitely feels nice. But the other thing I also got is at the bottom over here. This is a metal plate. You can see that there's a little bit of a brand on it as well. It's a nice touch, but it's also functional. because having a metal plate, even though it'll cost you extra, it does ensure that the board will just not move as much. And just to do the tapping demo, notice that I can tap this board a bit, and it's easy to move. And that's not the case with this board because of the extra weight. You pay a premium for it, but if you're sensitive to board movement, it can be a premium worth paying for. When you get this board, you get a few accessories. That includes nice cables that feel like they have a bit of quality attached to it. But you also get this bag, as well as a key puller. But the bag effectively comes with these extenders. You can put legs underneath, and then you can screw these in to the underside of the board. So what I can do, I can attach a little leg in here. I can do the same here. And by doing this, you literally give the board some legs, and this will cause a bit of tilt. I'm not sure exactly, but it feels like it's a good 15 to maybe 20 degrees of tilt, and it does feel like it makes the typing experience, a little bit more comfortable. The main downside of doing this is that it can be harder to store a board that isn't flat, and that might involve, if you want to travel with this, right, you gotta remove these in order to be able to carry it with you. It's not for everyone, but still something that you can appreciate. So far I've mainly been talking about the positives of this keyboard, and now we get to the segment where I talk about some of the negatives. Now, to explain one of the negatives, we're going to have a look at these top two keycaps. And notice what happens when I press it. When I press it down, it doesn't touch the other keycap, but notice that it does that only ever so slightly. If the keycap was a slightly different angle, or if it was slightly bigger, these two keycaps would hit. And I've tried a couple of other keycaps and found that they actually scratch each other when you're typing along. The website does warn for this. Because this is so tightly designed to fit your hand, there are going to be a bunch of keycaps that simply will not fit. There is an option to go for a design that isn't so tight, so to say, but you do have to select that consciously. So, if you are the kind of person that is really sensitive about the keycaps that they're using, before you buy, talk to the owner about this. He will probably be able to advise you, but it is something to really keep in the back of your mind. I also think that given the fact that there's a pretty solid RGB coming out of this, it would also be nice if you could get keycaps where maybe there's like a little dash or a little circle that allows you to see the color that's underneath. It's a north-facing LED, so there could be north-facing keycaps maybe for this, but the site does not provide them. Another downside of the fact that everything is so tight is that removing the switches is pretty easy, but removing the keycaps is actually kind of tricky. Especially on the ridge over here, I've just found it to be very hard to just get the switch puller to be fully underneath the keycap. And although it was unexpected, I actually found this keycap puller from my Wooting keyboard to be just slightly more preferable if I'm switching out the switches, because you gotta get the keycaps out first. Another thing to keep in mind with this keyboard, by the way, is that this is really a chunky boy. It is a big keyboard, especially when you compare it to something like the Voyager. Boards like this are really easy to pick up and carry around and bring to the office, whereas this board doesn't even come with any case whatsoever. Now, you can make your own, and I'm not saying you can't travel with this. It is just going to be more burdensome because it is a big keyboard in the end. So if you care about that, maybe think twice. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting here is that if you have a keyboard like this, the ZSA Voyager, this keyboard is not fit to my hand, but that does come with a benefit if you think about resale value. I could put this up on eBay, and it would retain a lot of its value because someone else might be interested in buying it. That is going to be a lot harder to do with a keyboard like this that is designed to fit your hand and your hand only. If the main feature of a keyboard is that it really fits your hand nicely, then selling it is going to be kind of tricky. Finally, a thing to keep in the back of your mind is that this keyboard is not cheap. You can go to the website. A lot of the price depends on what options you go for. But the thing that might make it more expensive is that this thing does ship from the US, and depending on where you ship it to, you might incur customs tariffs. This has happened to me with other boards as well, but it can cause another good 10% of the cost to be added on top, and that's something to keep in the back of your mind. So, having said all of those things, what's my final verdict? Well, in short, I think it's just a really nice board. A curved keywell with hot-swappable switches, that is just so nice. It's the first time I've actually been able to experience that. It is a board that takes a while to get used to, but once you're there, I think the typing experience is actually pretty dang comfortable. I like to rotate my boards, and this is now, I think, my favorite MX board in my rotation. It is not going to be a board that I would like to bring to the office. It's just simply too big for that. But for my home setup, especially if I have to do a little bit of creative work where it's not just development all day, I also got to click and drag something, well, having a trackball is just super nice. So there you have it. I think it's a nice board. I really love the fact that there's finally a hot-swappable curved keywell out there. Now, to be clear, the fact that this is in my rotation doesn't mean that it's the only curved keywell board. The Glove 80, very much, is also still in my rotation. It's just that the Glove 80, I cannot replace the switches, and these are chalk switches. So if you are the kind of person that really cares about switching the switches, and if you are really the kind of person that wants to have MX switches, then this board might certainly be worth the price.